Hi there everyone and welcome to Tech Travers. Today, finally, we're taking a look at the brand new update for EmulationStation, which makes it fully functional with Android. We have had this frontend for Linux for ages, and it's actually one of the most popular frontends in some of the Chinese handhelds that frequently pops up on the market. And if you're a follower on my channel, you probably don't need any explanation of what an emulator frontend is, but in short, it's a software interface designed to organize and facilitate the use of multiple emulated gaming platforms on a single device. It provides a visually appealing and intuitive way to browse, launch and manage various video game emulators and their respective games. It does not come with any emulators or games, so you're gonna have to supply that yourself. And in this video we're swapping out another very popular frontend for Android, Daijisho, with EmulationStation, and I'm gonna show you what you need to do to get everything working. So without any further delay, let's jump into it. Now, Daijisho is not by any means a bad frontend, it gets the job done and it looks very good straight out of the box. But EmulationStation has a few more aces up its sleeve and it's generally the frontend I prefer to use. EmulationStation can't be downloaded from the Google Play Store as of today, so you need to go to their Patreon site and sign up as an Android supporter. This is actually not a subscription in terms of having to pay monthly. You can pay for just 1 month and then cancel your subscription and still get a lifetime of free updates. So that's actually a very big deal and it feels good to help out the developers at the same time. So once you have paid, you get this download link with the EmulationStation APK, and you can either download it straight to your Android device or on your computer as I do, and then transfer it to a place on your device via cable or micro SD. Just put it in a folder that you will remember when you're back on your device. I usually put it in the downloads folder. And back on your device, use a file browser of your choice. I use the built-in files manager that comes installed on this Odin 2. Locate the APK we just transferred and install it. You might also need to allow your files manager to make changes on your device before the installation starts. Once the installation is complete, go ahead and open the app. This will take you to a brief setup process for EmulationStation. Click Begin Setup, and then you need to allow EmulationStation to manage files on your device. So click on Open Permission and click the button to allow it. Go back, and now EmulationStation wants to create an installation folder named ESDE. Choose whether you want it installed on your internal storage or on the micro SD card. I actually chose to install it on my internal storage, then later regretted my decision, but it's easy to just drag and drop the folders from your internal storage to your micro SD card later if you should change your mind like I did. And once you have done that, you also need to choose where EmulationStation should create the folder structure for your ROMs. And same thing here, I chose to install it on the Odin's internal storage and then later changed my mind. But rest assured that this is just as easy to change later. And as a last step, you will have the option to create a folder for each and every system that EmulationStation supports, from old arcade systems to PlayStation 3 and Nintendo Switch. This will remove some of the process of mapping emulators to correct folders so that they can find the games, etc. So it's recommended that you create them, but keep in mind that this will create a lot of folders, even if you want to play just a few systems. Once those folders are created, the setup is complete, and when you click that, you understand that you might need to allow some specific emulators to have directory permissions as well. EmulationStation will boot up. However, since we don't have any games in our ROMs folders yet, nothing will happen. So quit out of EmulationStation and put your micro SD card back in your computer or use a cable to connect your device. Now, before we transfer any games, do you remember that I told you that I changed my mind regarding the installation source of EmulationStation from internal storage to my micro SD instead? All I had to do was to cut out the ESDE folder as well as the ROMs folder from my internal storage and paste it inside my micro SD card instead. And since the ROMs folder has quite a few folders in it, it took a few seconds, but after that the migration from internal to external storage is done. After that, all you have to do is to populate all the different ROMs folders with the correct games for that system. So my GBA games goes inside the GBA folder, my Genesis games goes inside the Genesis folder, and so on. And back on my Odin, since I moved the installations folder and the ROMs folder from my internal storage to my external storage, it will go through the setup process again, and this time I will choose the already created folders on my microSD, in other words the folders we just moved in the step before. If you didn't change the source for your installation folders, you won't have to do this again. And then everything will be set up and running. And since we now have games in our ROMs folders, EmulationStation will automatically show the systems we have games for in this default user interface. Now, there are a few things I like to do when I start up EmulationStation on a new device for the first time. First of all, I like to remove the touch control overlay since our device here have built-in controls and we don't need to use the touch controls. So click on the start button to open the menu and then go inside input device settings. Here, simply untick enable touch overlay and you will get a warning that you will have to use a controller or you will lock yourself out of the app. So don't remove this if you're on a smartphone, but on a device like this it's perfectly fine. Next, I usually change the theme to something even more appealing. Open the menu and then click on UI settings. Then click on theme downloader and here you can see a preview of all the themes that you can download and then you can just download them directly to your device. Once you have downloaded a few themes, back out of the theme downloader and choose one of your new themes under that option. Now, a small disclaimer is necessary here. As previously mentioned, EmulationStation does not install any emulators for you. However, if you have already installed emulators such as RetroArch for your classic games, Dolphin for GameCube and Wii games, or Aether SX2 for PlayStation 2 emulation, EmulationStation will detect them on your device and automatically configure them so that these emulators launch their respective games. However, this is mostly just true in theory. For some emulators, especially standalone ones, you may need to first remap the game library so that these emulators know where to find the games we transferred earlier. And you might also need to tell EmulationStation which emulator to use if you have more than one emulator installed for a certain system. But instead of talking, let me just illustrate what I mean. First of all, to change which emulator to launch for a specific system, open the menu, go inside Other Settings and then Alternative Emulators. And here it's as simple as selecting a system and then tell EmulationStation which emulator you want as default. So for N64, for example, I want to use the standalone emulator from Google Play Store, which is M64 Plus FC, so I'm choosing that instead of the one that EmulationStation chose as default for me. So do this for each and every system that you might want to change, and then it's time to test it all out. And now we're approaching the other small thing we have to fix before everything is working as intended. If I try to launch a N64 game, it will jump to my emulator, but the game won't launch. And that's simply because the emulator doesn't know where my games are anymore. If I refresh the library, it becomes empty. Luckily, all we have to do is to remap the source to where we have our ROMs stored. Since we changed the folder structure before, our emulator has lost the games directory and we need to show it where they are now. And once that is fixed, we don't need to do it again. The games will launch directly from EmulationStation, even if we add more games to the library in the future. And just to make it clear, let's go through the process with one more emulator as well. This time it's the PlayStation 2 emulator Aether SX2. I just installed the emulator from the Google Play Store, so EmulationStation actually takes me to the initial setup process for that emulator. So here I'm just telling the emulator where I have my BIOS files and once again where I have my games. And once that setup process is complete, as you can see, the next time I launch a PlayStation 2 game from within EmulationStation, it launches straight into the game, just as intended. And for the last part of this guide, I want to show you how to scrape the interwebs for Boxart and other media to make these game lists look even better. This is of course entirely optional, but it's something that enhances the overall user experience a lot if you ask me. So once again, open the menu and this time go into the top option called Scraper. Here you want to use a service called ScreenScraper to fetch all the media we need. And to use ScreenScraper, you first need to create a free account over at their site, which I will link to in the video description. So pause this video and create an account first if you haven't done it already, and once you have that account, continue with this video. Click on Scrape these systems to choose which systems to fetch media for. I will only scrape Game Boy Advance for this video. Next, go inside the account settings, and you probably already guessed it, but here you need to put in your username and password for the ScreenScraper account that you created earlier. Once you have applied your account settings, back out, and if you want to, you can go into content settings and choose manually which kind of media you want to download. I usually want it all, so I just leave it at default. You can also go inside other settings and play around with a few other options as well, like your preferred region if you want region-specific Boxart, for example. But once you're happy with your configuration, scroll down and tap Start to start downloading all the media files. Depending on how many systems and games you are scraping, this can take a very long time. I usually set up everything before I go to sleep and then let it scrape media for my whole library, which takes several hours. But for only one system, like in this video, it's of course much faster. Also keep in mind that you can only scrape 20,000 media files before having to wait 24 hours to do it again. And even if that sounds a lot, it usually goes much faster than you might think. So if you get an error code saying 430, that means you have used up all your downloads and you need to wait a few hours before you can continue to download the rest of the files. There is a method to support the ScreenScraper devs to get more downloads right away, but it's in French and I haven't bothered to look it up. Besides, I'm not in a hurry anyway. Also, keep in mind that once you have completed the scraping and have all the files you need, you can use the same micro SD card in another Android device as well, and there won't be any need to redo the process. That's the reason why I changed from my internal to external storage before. And once it finally completes, if we back out, we no longer have these simple lists, we have a much more dynamic experience with box art, metagame information, a small gameplay image, and even if we hover a few seconds over a game, we get an actual video preview of the game. In other words, a much more console-like experience overall. And you know what? This has actually been it for my video tutorial on how to download and install EmulationStation for Android, and also how to move from Daijisho or basically any other setup as well if you've used one before. I hope this video answers some of your questions. If it did, or if you enjoyed watching it, please let me know by leaving a thumbs up, and don't hesitate to write a comment down below if you have any questions or just want to say hello. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more content like this in the future. Thanks for watching, TechCravers out.